So good afternoon to everybody and good morning. This is Guido Lobrano from ITI. We are very pleased you could join us today for a panel organized by ITI, the Information Technology Industry Council, on Schrems 2 1 year later. I'm pretty sure everybody here online is familiar with the issue. We are exactly 1 year this week after the so-called Schrems 2 ruling that has probably disrupted many of the people here summer holidays. I'm very pleased to be joined for this discussion by a few truly remarkable speakers. So we have with us Bruno Giancarelli, who is the head of unit and deputy director at the European Commission's Digital Justice. He's in charge of international data flows and protection. So he's been at the center of many of these issues. We also have Bojana Bellamy. She's the president of the Center for Information Policy Leadership, CIPL. Bojana, I think this is the 20th year anniversary of CIPL, so congratulations for that. Another anniversary. And then we have with us Caitlin Fennessy. She's now a research director at IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And she also used to be part of the US government team that was involved in the Privacy Shield negotiations. And finally, Peter Swire is a senior counsel at Alston & Baird, and is also professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology. He's a highly recognized privacy expert and has a very good perspective on the US situation on all of these issues. So the idea for today is that we will hear from Bruno at the beginning and then turn to our speakers from some initial remarks around 4 or 5 minutes each. And then we'll continue a discussion. We would highly appreciate any questions from the floor. So after all our speakers have spoken, I'll check if there is already some intervention that anybody wants to make, and then again turn to our speakers again for each other's comments and perspectives. In terms of the topic we're discussing today, I think the importance of this issue cannot be overestimated. Cross-border data flows are crucial to global trade and to the economic recovery. In the transatlantic data flows context, in particular, data underpin a trading relationship that at over 1 trillion euros annually is the largest in the world. Transatlantic data flows are continuing to be the fastest growing and largest in the world. They are accounting for over 50% of both Europe and the US data flows. 1 year ago, the invalidation of the Privacy Shield has created legal uncertainty for more than 5,000 Privacy Shield certified organizations, but the impacts of this ruling are definitely much wider and I think reverberated throughout the whole economy. The ruling, on the other hand, also upheld the standard contractual clauses as a valid transfer mechanism. But the decision also undoubtedly created questions around the long-term viability of this mechanism. In the meantime, during the past year, we know that the Commission has finalized the new SECs, and I'm sure we will hear a bit about that from Bruno in a moment. Something else that has happened is that the European Data Protection Board has adopted its guidance that embraces a risk-based approach, but also sets a very high bar for companies transferring data internationally. Another development which has a certain weight is finally the approval of the UK adequacy decision by the European Commission following Brexit, which we think bodes well, but of course, again, it's not the same situation. And then 1 month ago, we had a very important EU-US summit, and the conclusions of that summit also contain a very short and high-level statement of commitment on this issue. That is encouraging. But again, 1 year has passed, so I think it would be very interesting to hear, first of all, from Bruno, where do we stand? What has happened in this year and what has changed, and how do you feel about the future, Bruno?
Thank you very much, Guido, first for the invitation. Very happy to be on this panel with colleagues who are all friends, because we have been discussing these issues also, and we have been working with these issues in different capacities now for a certain number of years. So very happy to be here. I don't know if this is an anniversary celebration, but certainly it's an important moment to reflect about these issues. Very timely topic. Of course, international data flows is a very important, relevant, and timely topic that I know amongst your members, but more generally, the broader audiences raises a number of questions, concerns, depending from where you're looking at all of this. Sometimes anxieties, others would say enthusiasm. And we certainly don't underestimate those issues, those concerns. But we also see at the same time that this is an area which is characterized by important and positive and encouraging development that can bring a new opportunity. So I would like to briefly, yes, recall what has happened over the last year, and you have already mentioned some of this, Guido, but also talk about the future, and in doing that, recalling, what are the underpinning principles of our policy, of our action, of our strong commitment to international data flows, to strong commitment to transatlantic data flows, and a strong commitment to international cooperation in this area. Needless to say, I'm sorry if I'm stating the obvious, the importance of both data flows and privacy. Data flows are an inescapable fact of so many activities. Trade, cooperation between public authorities, but also simply social interactions, as our participation to your roundtable today. The pandemic has only highlighted and further confirmed this. Data flows have been and are essential to the continuity of so many activities, government activities, business activities, cultural activities, educational activities. But data flows are also essential, were essential, continue to be essential to our response to the pandemic, and also to the way we are coming out of this crisis. If we think about, of course, a tracing app, but also if we think about and I'm speaking from Brussels, from the EU, for instance, of another solution that involves the collection, the processing, and the sharing of some data on the strong safeguards, digital solutions such as the what is called the COVID certificate, or the digital certificate, which, as you may know, is fully enforced throughout the EU since July the 1st. And it's against that background that we as a Commission, as the EU, we believe that promoting data flows and on the one hand, and on the other hand, promoting a strong privacy safeguards are not a contradictory objective, but on the contrary, very complementary objective, which can and need to go hand in hand. And it's on that basis that, and this is reflected in this approach, is reflected in our ambitious agenda on facilitating trusted data transfers. And that means making the full use of our transfer toolbox under the GDPR. You have recalled some of our recent developments in this area, but yes, it means further intensifying on our work on adequacy. I think that one of the lessons of Schrems 2 is that adequacy is an extremely useful instrument, of course, if the necessary requirements are met, because it provides a horizontal, a straightforward, a stable solution to data transfer, which doesn't then involve the case-by-case assessment that otherwise is required under the GDPR as interpreted by the court. And that's why we have certainly worked very much on adequacy since over the last year. The two UK adequacy decisions that have been adopted at the end of last month, which are an essential component of our post-Brexit relationship with the UK. We have, as you know, 2 years ago, we have concluded a mutual adequacy arrangement with Japan, creating the biggest area of free data flows in the world. We have concluded a similar arrangement with Korea a few months ago. Now the adequacy decision is in the our decision-making process. We are in talks with a number of other Asian and particular Asian and Latin American partners. And you will have seen in our two drafts, on not the Korean draft, but the adopted version of the two UK adequacy decisions, how we how they're reasoned, how they're motivated, and how we explain that these systems, we believe, fully meet the requirements we need to meet on following the Schrems 2 judgment. This is not at all mission impossible. This simply requires, of course, a deeper, more detailed analysis and of agreeing on a number of common safeguards. Our work on adequacy, on data transfer, doesn't stop there. You've mentioned the new SCCs. I'm not happy to answer questions on them. They do a number of things. They have, of course, a strong Schrems 2 angle, but they are also, we believe, better adapted to the realities of today, digital economy, by covering more transfer scenarios, by reflecting the fact that we are dealing now with much more complex processing chains, and therefore this possibility to this docking clause, for instance, for more than two parties to join the SCCs, including in the course of the life cycle of a certain business transaction. On SCCs, as we have announced, we will continue to work on them, including through a Q&A, which we'll try to, in a user-friendly language, in a very concrete, we hope as concrete as possible language, try to answer to a number of questions that will naturally be raised in the context of the application of the implementation of the SCCs. That will be a dynamic instrument that will be online and regularly updated. We really count on your members' feedback. Please don't hesitate to contact us, to send you your experience and questions you may have, because that will feed that work. You have also recalled the adoption by the EDPB of their recommendation, a very important document. We have worked closely with the EDPB to, I think, and you've seen this, come to a more convergent interpretation, which I think is important to create out there and to contribute to creating more legal certainty. We will work also on other tools that have been underused so far, but this is really on the top of our agenda: certification and code of conduct. So you can see a very ambitious agenda from our side, which, by the way, doesn't only concerns data transfer mechanism under the GDPR, but that also aims at using in a more synergetical way different instruments we have under EU law, instruments concerning, of course, under the GDPR, but also our trade instruments. And when I mention our trade instruments, I'm thinking, for instance, of the digital chapter of all the trade agreements that we are negotiating at multilateral level, for instance, in particular in the framework of the WTO, the e-commerce negotiations, but also at a bilateral level. We have now free trade agreement negotiation with a number of countries: Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Indonesia, Tunisia. And in all of these negotiations, bilateral and multilateral, we table for us a very important provision that provides a straightforward prohibition of data localization requirements, while of course preserving, because this is not something we negotiate in trade agreements, the regulatory autonomy of both parties when it comes to data protection, I would say to genuine data protection, to deciding what is the level of protection you want to afford to personal data. We believe that this is very important to draw a clear line between digital protectionism and genuine data protection. You have seen a reflection of that, not only a reflection of that, but a materialization of that in the trade and cooperation agreement we concluded last December with the UK, that has a provision that clearly rules out a number of restrictions to digital trade, including data localization. This is also something we are very much working on. There are also other aspects of our policies, including, for instance, in terms of foreign investment screening, where privacy is becoming has a role to play. And we see that on this we are increasingly in agreement, or we have an approach which is increasingly convergent with our data, with many of our partners. We were mentioning standard contractual clauses, for instance. We have seen in the recent months standard contractual clauses developed and adopted by New Zealand, by ASEAN, the Association of Southeastern European Countries, and these standard model clauses present a lot of commonalities with our approach, and we will work with these partners and others also to bridge our different systems of model clauses. I think that's also a very promising area of cooperation. Then, of course, I cannot talk about data flows without speaking about transatlantic data flows. They are, of course, very significant. Just to give you an example, a figure, there are 55% more data flows via transatlantic cables than over trans-Pacific routes. And a large part of these flows are personal data, about personal data. This is why one of the reasons why, of course, negotiating and agreeing on a successor arrangement to the Privacy Shield is an absolutely priority for us in Brussels, but I know the same is true for American counterparts in Washington. This was reaffirmed in the visit, indeed, in the context of the visit of President Biden to Brussels. There was a specific meeting between Commerce Secretary Raimondo and Justice Commissioner Reinders, who is leading in the Commission on this negotiation. And we have also, following that meeting in Brussels, intensify our dialogue, intensify our negotiation, exploring solutions that we hope could bring us closer to an agreement. But we all agree, and I think also speak for my American counterpart, that a durable solution for transatlantic data transfer is only one that can deliver legal certainty, stability to business, and adequate protection to citizens. And the only way to achieve this is to develop a new arrangement which is fully compliant with the Schrems II requirements. Commissioner Reinders has said it many times: no shortcut here, no easy or quick fix that will not solve the issue. And I'm saying this while, of course, not underestimating the complexity of the issues we're dealing with, which are issues that are complex in the US, as they're complex in Europe, as they're complex in any other modern system of balancing between national security and privacy. The adequacy decision I've mentioned show that that balance is possible, and we are certainly talking about two countries such as the United Kingdom and South Korea that have important national security apparatus because they have to address important national security threats. So this is certainly a sensitive area, but we believe that we can find solutions. The new administration very much stresses on the fact that we are like-minded partners, and that's very true, and that we need to work closer together if we want to set standards, and if rather than others which wouldn't share our values and principles. And when we're talking about a solution to the privacy shield situation, we're talking about principles that are very fundamental and that should be very fundamental to two like-minded partners. Access to court, enforcement, individual rights, limitation against excessive interference with privacy. We believe really that we should and we can find solutions on such fundamental principles. And then let me finish by mentioning another important development that has characterized the last year, which is not surprising, but which is surprisingly new, because many of us have hoped this for many years, and it is finally, in a certain sense, coming, is that there is an increasing demand for international work, international standards in this area. I'm saying that, again, this is easy, but we can see that through some of the work I've mentioned, there is, for instance, more work between us and other, if you want, I don't really like that term, but that's how they call other regional blocks, that certain international organizations, I mentioned ASEAN and the others, are putting data privacy and data flows on the top of the agenda. This is very promising because it allows, of course, in terms of critical mass to deal with broad range of countries, range of systems, and also meaning the fact that we are increasingly using similar tools, such as, for instance, model clauses. That's for companies operating in multiple jurisdictions. That is something which is also very, very useful, and we really want to work more with our international partners on such tools. And then there is for the first, so it's a first attempt. It's the beginning of a process, but we certainly support it at the OECD to identify a number of safeguards shared by OECD members on governance access. We believe that this is a very useful exercise. It needs to be credible, of course. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be credible, even if at the first stage it will probably be quite high level. But there has been interesting discussions, and the fact that international organizations, other actors are becoming, I think, a player, important player in this conversation, in this discussion, is again a very promising development. So I will, I think I've spoken probably too long. I will close here, but as you can see, there's a lot of work ongoing, and there will be more work in the coming months. And we need your feedback. We need your contribution. The submission we received, for instance, on the STCs were extremely useful, and we have read and not only looked at, but read them and assessed them carefully, each of them. And I think you have seen also the result of this, the consequences of this, the impact on this, on the final version of the STCs that really have taken many submissions we received from the business community, from civil society, from other stakeholders, have taken them into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruno. This was very interesting. And thanks not only for your perspective, but also for all the work that you're doing that definitely deserves recognition and praise. One thing in particular I'd like to stress, you mentioned, clear rejection of digital protectionism. This is something that we've also heard from Commissioner Reinders, and it's something that, as you can imagine, our industry feels very strongly about, and we really appreciate your perspective, which is not to be given for granted these days. Also your work, all of this comes alongside the heavy, negotiations that you are involved in, and I'm sure we can go back to that with you and the other panelists in a moment as well. This is also, I think, a reflection of the importance of this, not only for large companies, but also for smaller and medium-sized companies. You mentioned the upcoming guidance on SECs, the Q&A, which, again, this is something that even smaller businesses with less of a legal expertise need to need to be aware about and comply with. So it's very important. And I think I'm turning to Boyana now, because as SIPL, your work is heavily focused on providing this type of guidance to companies. So I think you have a good perspective on how companies can handle these issues and this situation, and what could be the practical difficulties, or what could be the recommendations that you want to share.
Sure. Thank you, Guido. And again, hello, everybody. And really, it is great to be here together. I know Bruno and I hear Bruno speak, but every time I hear Bruno speak, he always says something else, and he says something important. So I think, there's never enough time to actually have these conversations. It's always important to have them, because I think every time you talk and discuss, you're going to think about something else. So thank you for getting us together, Guido. I think it is important. Sort of talking about anniversaries, right? It is 20 years of SIPL. But, my first piece of work that I did in my first job, which was privacy job, was actually on data flows. And this is more than 20 years ago, like 6 years ago. Bruno, I know you worked on this in your private practice before joining the commission. And it's interesting that we're still talking about this topic, right? It's interesting, it's a bit dispiriting in some ways, but it shows you the importance of this topic globally. So couple of sort of comments I wanted to make. So this year of sort of post-Schrems decision has been really what I call a reactive year. It has been a reactive year because everybody's been trying to react to the decision and try to regroup and try to sort of, understand the impact. And in some ways, it has drained resources from so many other things we all wanted to do, companies wanted to do, the need to do privacy by design, the need to develop accountable technologies, do the DPIAs. And that to me is sort of, it's tough. It's tough when you look at it like what we've spent a year working on this, and, we're going to spend some more time. But then, that's what we need to do. It is not an easy topic. And we just have to invest time, and perhaps maybe this time really look for something that is more durable and more robust. So, everybody has been in this reactive mode. Data protection authorities, you have seen that. Obviously, the commission had to deal with this, but the companies as well. But on the other hand, everybody has put huge amounts of work into this. And I think we need to recognize that. Yeah, we need to recognize what it takes for the commission to actually address this judgment in a constitutional judgment in a structured manner, what it takes to actually negotiate something with, one of our partners, what it takes to come up with the new SECs and achieve what has been achieved. And the board as well, European Data Protection Board, the DPAs, right? They have, they've come up with the guidance as well. And the companies have been doing a lot. So I think we must recognize that everybody's trying. And in some ways, to me, commitment and good faith effort is important as well, right? We haven't got a solution, but there is a huge progress. So let's talk a little bit about some of this progress. Certainly, the new standard contractual clauses that have come out of the commission have been helpful, will be helpful, and I think they were long awaited, right? We needed new set of clauses, not just because of the judgment, but because we needed them to make data flows, negotiations, and contractual arrangements more attuned to, in fact, how data really moves. So the fact that this is a modular approach, that it can be sort of cut and paste and adapted to different data transfers, that it caters for multi-party, complexity of data flows, a chain of data flows, that's all super useful. And I think, they will provide bigger legal certainty. I mean, SECs are hugely important because, of course, the court validate SECs, right? They are still there as a mechanism with these supplementary measures. And they do adopt and they do set the risk-based approach to also looking at data transfers and doing the transfer impact assessment, which I think is really important. And I think that was a good signal to the board as well. The second one, of course, is the board recommendation. It's only recommendation. It's not actually the guidance, which is interesting, right? It tells you this is what the regulator expects companies to do. It's a recommendation. Hasn't got quite the same maybe legal effect as the guidance. And certainly, I think what we have seen as the final guidance, the June guidance, is much better than what came out in December. I can't resist to say that I know the board has received over 200 submissions. I mean, Sipel wrote a whole paper even before the first guidance came out on kind of what could be some of the solutions. And I am so glad to see that, in fact, all the great work that ITI has done and so many others and experts has been taken into account, not completely, and that's fine. We understand that, we appreciate that, but it has been taken into account. This was one of the rare recommendations that in fact changed as a result of this consultation and input. And I would like the board please to take this into account and kind of behave, do this again as they're issuing some of the seminal guidelines. It's very hard to ask for consultation and never to take into account anything. So this is really a good precedent. So I hope the board will do that. And so what we really do appreciate about the board's recommendation is that there is this acceptance of what we would call risk-based approach, right? So it means that you do have to look into all contexts of a data transfer, including including law and practices of the third country that are in place. And of course, that can go one way or the other way, but it actually enables more flexibility as the companies start conducting these transfer risk assessments. The board doesn't quite use the word risk-based approach. I wish they did, but I know they're kind of worried about that. I think they should stop being worried. I think that the GDPR is a completely risk-based approach law. It's actually a great progressive element of GDPR. And in fact, it's the one that we want other countries to emulate on all aspects. So, I like the board to actually always do a risk-based analysis and interpret the rules in this way as well. I think that they're doing this, but as I say, they don't quite call it there. There are quite a number of nuances there. I mean, I think there's a bit of a nuance around derogations as well, potentially opening a possibility for them to be used for specific, I know Bruno disagrees, but for specific circumstances, in addition to supplementary guidelines and measures. The examples are generally better, apart from the two examples which we still worry about, which is the cloud example and the one on kind of sharing within the business group of companies of data. Again, I kind of feel these two examples should have been evaluated in light of the guidance, because in many cases, both of these would be not problematic if they were sufficiently framed by certain data transfer mechanisms, and there are some supplementary measures as well. So that is actually, again, good positive development. Obviously, the EU-US negotiations are really important. I know they're hard, and I think we have to actually appreciate they're hard. One of the things that I have learned when I joined my previous job was actually, how do you negotiate TS? And in fact, negotiating TS is not about meeting in the middle, right? It's not. In negotiating TS is understanding the other person's problems and concerns and trying to adjust our own position based on that. And I think that in some ways is what here needs to happen. And I think they need time to come up with something that is durable, strong, more robust. But I think there are some potentially avenues out there. I just remind people that the latest European Court of Human Rights decision on the Big Brother, the UK and Sweden's case, kind of recognizes that bulk surveillance, for example, could be proportionate and necessary, and in fact, it's a fact of life. So they're kind of setting 8 criteria for that, as opposed to saying this can't happen. And the 8 criteria talk about the redress, talk about independence, but again, open for what that could actually be in practice. So I just wonder whether there is something there that we can pick up, but I know Peter and others will be addressing that. UK adequacy, of course, was another piece of good news, and I'm really glad that has happened. I think one of the Commission's letters said to the board, if UK not, who else would get this? And I think that is fair enough. All I can say is that I hope the adequacy will become a more agile instrument for the Commission, but other countries as well, to sort of enable data flows. But I'll talk perhaps, if I have time, about that more. And then the OECD development is an interesting one. So if we all agree that something needs to be done about governmental access to data and the use of data by government agencies, surveillance, and look, we have got the same thing in Europe. It's just that we have got Convention of Human Rights, we've got the the CJEU, who are kind of on both sides sort of attacking and trying to chisel the best way forward, and they don't agree, as I've just said. Often they don't. So maybe there is a need for discussions at sort of supranational level, international level, because I still feel that companies are put between rock and a hard place. I feel they are in between conflicts of laws, constitutionally different approaches to looking at things, and I think it is really very hard for any commercial entity to kind of long-term drive the legal certainty that is required on this. So these are all very good news. And Bruno has also said something which I really appreciate the message. I appreciate the message about being ambitious on data flows and really trying to combat digital protectionism. I think it's important for the Commission to keep saying that and keep saying it all the time, because despite what we say, despite what we think and what we know, there is this perception out there, right, globally, that this could be protectionist measure, which, it is not probably. It's to do with the rule of law. It's to do with constitutional system. But does this look like data localization to so many different countries? That's a big question. And this is why I want to talk about something which I call not so good news, because the glass is half full, right? We have to look at it like that. So not so good news. I don't want to say bad news, but not so good news. I think not so good news is this fact that privacy has become a data policy, has become political, right? And this makes it hard for everybody who is in companies to actually navigate this new world. And we see that with Brexit and data flows. We see that with US, EU. We see it with discussions on data localization and the attempts of some countries like India, Indonesia, Russia, China to localize and and it is not easy this now, right? So the stakes have been made higher, and so companies need to also ensure that privacy and data policy gets the right level of attention at the board and executive top management level. So this isn't just about legal compliance and how we sign some contract from A to B. It really is, how do we deal with this kind of data debate globally, and how do we as a business operate when there are all these different political pressures and forces pulling potentially sometimes in different directions. So I really, I think companies kind of need to step up as well. The second point is that, data flows are a big compliance burden. Compliance with data flow is a compliance burden, and it's not going to go away. Yes, we have the new SECs, but, it's going to take the market a few years to actually settle. Those of you who've been working in this field remember how long it took us to, for the best part of my career, I was still encountering strange requests when we were negotiating outsourcing and IT deals. People just didn't understand privacy, didn't understand security, didn't understand how the old clauses were going to work, right? And then you had new kids on the block and they don't get it either. So, we're going to have a moment where we are going to internally as companies have to take time, spend money and efforts and resources in, first of all, training our lawyers, training our business partners and business functions to actually negotiate and work and implement the new SECs. And of course, make sure that there is consensus between all of us in global privacy community as to how the new SECs will work. How do you make this Lego model, with the modular system? And that's not the criticism of SEC, it's just a reflection. And yes, we do have a good transition period, but this is going to take time. And this moment of unsettlement is going to take a few years. And I think companies need to go back to their leadership and sort of say, we need resources for this, because there is going to be huge amounts of papering all the data flows. And I would love if we were to have adequacies all the time, because then we don't have to spend time on papering stuff. But that, is not there quite yet. And therefore, in the absence of that, compliance with the new SECs and making sure that once we sign this, we actually comply with this, it's not going to be easy, right? And of course, doing the transfer risk assessments, I still, it's not the best solution, this to me. It's tough. It's tough. Of course, you do some transfer risk assessments in everything that you do, but to do it to the way that the board expects is really incredibly high level. So these are sort of perhaps some of the bad news. I'm going to stop now, right? And happy to take some questions.
Thanks,
later.
Boyan. I was about to ask that. We are trying to this is obviously a lot more than just Privacy Shield. Has a lot of issues. I couldn't help but notice that Bruno's body language indicated that he wanted to react, which made me think about some recent rivalry between Italy and England. But I won't comment on that. But I think one important element also from Boyan's comments is the role of the DPB, of DPAs, and I know Caitlin has been also writing and focusing a lot of her research recently on enforcement. So maybe can we turn to you, Caitlin, and you can share your thoughts on the situation as you see it.
Thank you so much.
I should have said that in Boyan as well.
Yes, I will try to be brief here. Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor to speak alongside really anyone on this panel, let alone all of you. So I appreciate it. I just wanted to look back quickly kind of at where we've been and over the past year. And I can't help but remember the immediate reaction that I had on July 16th around 4 a.m. East Coast time when the decision came out. And my immediate reaction back then was, oh, wow, the Court of Justice just cut off data flows to the United States. Now, I certainly understood that Privacy Shield was invalidated and model contracts were upheld. But as we all know here discussing and folks listening in, the national security safeguards that underpinned Privacy Shield underpinned all transfer mechanisms. So initially, I had a really difficult time understanding, okay, how do you make this work in practice? And so over the course of the hours that followed and the weeks and months that followed, I certainly tempered my reaction. And I think like privacy professionals in companies, in regulators, in governments, got down to the business of trying to figure out how to make this work in practice and looking at what does a transfer impact assessment really mean? What types of, what is the scope in practice of what we're talking about here? And, what safeguards can really work? And I think Bruno and Boyana have helpfully pointed to some of the really positive engagement that we saw between stakeholders and companies, regulators and policymakers as the guidance was developed. Hundreds of stakeholders engaging to try to come to a bit more certainty in that area. And so I think, we have gotten through, ingenuity and resolve of privacy professionals to a more positive place, or we had gotten there in terms of what could be done in practice. But Guido, you asked me to speak about some of the enforcement, and we all knew the enforcement was coming, but I worry that without a negotiated solution, without governments, even at a multilateral basis engaging here, we are coming increasingly to realize that companies just can't do this alone. And so just on a personal front, I start to worry that I'm drifting closer back to some of my initial assessment, at least in small ways, in terms of looking at that enforcement. So we've seen out of some German regulators, a coordinated effort to send questionnaires to companies, assessing their transfer impact assessments, calling into question specifically their partnerships with US providers. Now, I want to be clear here that I think it's completely within their rights and legal authority to look into those transfer assessments. And I think it's really helpful that we are all focusing on what is being done in practice. I think that undoubtedly helps data protection. But you see that action, you see enforcement around a perceived lack of safeguards. You see enforcement around a lack of transfer impact assessments. You've seen, we saw enforcement out of Portugal around a insufficient or deemed insufficiency of safeguards. And we've seen some statements out of the CNIL suggesting that use of US-owned service providers, even where data is localized, will not meet the standards of the GDPR due to the extraterritorial reach of US law. And so I just think we all need to recognize that we are very much, as we've discussed, not at the end of the road here, that companies can do a lot here and that has been helpful, but that there remains huge uncertainty. And I worry that even if these enforcers are not saying you can't transfer data, that there is a huge discouraging element in terms of the partnerships between EU and US providers specifically that we need to acknowledge. And I'm hugely encouraged by Bruno's comments around the European Commission's, I think, long-standing pushback against data localization. I think we all agree on that, but we have to look at what some of these statements are kind of creating in practice, even if not putting in place hard legal prohibitions. So I guess that's where I'm focused. I think as a result, all eyes are very much on Bruno and his counterpart, Christopher Hoff in the US, but also on the huge work that has already been done in the OECD to develop trusted principles for government access to data on a multilateral basis. And it's hugely important that we capitalize on that work and roll it out so that there is a mutual understanding of what is acceptable here so that we can continue this progress. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Peter, thank you for your patience. Let me turn to you, and I'm sure you have some thoughts also on the U.S. situation, how we can see that through a U.S. lens. And then I also wanted to mention briefly that I know that there is a question in the chat, so we'll turn to that question for Bruno after.
Right. And I would like to commend to people Caitlin Fennessy's recent article summarizing the enforcement history in the last year that fleshes out some of the points she just made. I thought it was a very useful summary. Thanks to ITI for being here. I've had a history here since Safe Harbor, also along with Bojana, Bruno, and many others. And I think something that Bojana said about it's not a compromise 50-50, it's understanding the other side's concerns and the other side's needs is very relevant to the topic I'm going to address, which is redress. And some of what I'm saying here was in my testimony to the Senate Commerce Committee last December. And I'm doing work with Theodore Christakis at the Cross-Border Data Forum now on trying to figure out what the next round of things to do on redress might be. So I'll address some of that. The first thing is to look at what the EU law requires. As I've heard Bruno say in public, the CJAU was very specific when it comes to an individual right of redress. It says that right of redress goes to the essence of the right, which is European law speak for saying you really have to do it. And it requires, among other things, independence in fact-finding, independence in an adjudicatory process, and a binding order from the adjudicator. So those are things at a minimum that somehow have to happen in the US on redress, I think, for there to be a durable agreement. The second challenge is US law, especially this arcane issue of standing under Article 3 of the US Constitution. And there was a new Supreme Court case, the TransUnion case, just a few weeks ago, that reinforced how difficult it is for Congress to write a law that would allow somebody without a very concrete injury to go into US courts and get in front of a federal judge. And I'm not sure any proposal that I've seen currently would overcome, or at least clearly overcome, the standing problems the TransUnion case poses. So now we have a problem. It has to happen under EU law, redress. It's difficult to create in the US federal courts. So what are we going to do? And so this has led me, and I think others, to look at what are non-statutory approaches without Congress that could get us a lot of the way there or all the way there to what's needed to meet these two legal systems requirements. One reason for non-statutory is just the realistic politics. Congress is not close to creating a big, complicated system of redress. They wouldn't know how to write the statute tomorrow if they wanted to. A second reason that's, I think, less appreciated is that the CJEU talked about Executive Order 12333 and said that this is part of what needs to get fixed. And the history of Executive Order 12333 is that it's within the executive branch and the president's national security powers. It has not been the subject of congressional legislation. So if you have to fix 12333, it's not clear there is possibly a statute that could fix that part. And another part about a statute is, I think to get to an agreement, you need to build at least most of the scaffolding in the building, and then maybe a perfecting statute at the end if there's one or two things to fix at the end. But to build a whole system in Congress is hard to imagine that happening. Okay, so how can there be a non-statutory approach? With Theodore, I've been working on this. I believe the Commission and the US government have been working on this. It will take some creativity, but I think there are tools in place that may do a much better job than people realize. The first stage is, how do you get independent fact finding? So that can't be the DPOs. It can't be the privacy and civil liberties officers. There has to be some new mechanism where the fact finding is independent. There may be a role for the inspectors general either to do the fact finding or to check that the fact finding is being done properly, but somebody has to do facts in an independent way. And then there has to be a binding adjudication. So I've written, it could be the PCLOB that has some legal objections. I think there's creative ways. There could be other adjudicatory creatures created inside the US government without a statute by executive action. And I hope we'll be able to write more about that in the coming weeks. But the key point here is you can get a binding answer. You can get a binding answer because the president can say in an executive order or other executive statement that the agencies must do this. So if there's an adjudication, then the NSA must do the following things. And you can have oversight to make sure it's happening. You can have confidence building measures. You can add supplemental safeguards. But the point is, when it comes to the executive agencies in intelligence doing what they're supposed to do, the president can order them to do it. It doesn't take a statute for that to happen. And so with that as the sort of hopeful sign that a properly crafted executive statement can tell the agencies to comply, if we can build the right adjudicatory structure and fact-finding structure, I really think there may be a path to redress. I'd like to say about 2 sentences and then I'll wrap up. I think there's a geopolitical side here about, are the EU and US going to remain close allies, rule of law countries? Complying with Schrems is in part rule of law, and the US wants rule of law to happen for Hungary and Poland and all the other reasons. But how will this alliance stay close? And if it fractures, if the economic system fractures into localization, if the political system can't reach an agreement, we could really see a drifting apart of the Atlantic alliance and the Atlantic business relationships in a way that historians would look back on and say it's the fracturing of NATO, it's the fracturing of post-World War II. And so this is more important than trying to get some compliance things done for privacy. And I think goes to the heart of having an alliance with Europe and the United States and democracies around the world that can lead for the brighter future of rule of law and democracy, rather than a world in which authoritarians unfortunately get too much power. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Peter. And I think you are not being over dramatic, unfortunately. So totally agree with you. I'd like to check if Bruno is still with us because I can't see his image. Of course, I think it would be interesting to hear, Bruno, what you think about this. Creativity, Peter mentioned this, I think is a key word, a key approach here. And then once you've addressed that, maybe if you could also say a couple of words on the question that came from a person in the audience, Gianluca Diana from Microsoft, about the plans of DigiJustice on code of conducts and certifications for international data transfers. Yeah,
can you hear me? Because my connection is not ideal, and that's why I also removed them. So on the creativity, look, for any deal, you need to explore solutions and also to meet the Schrems 2 requirements. There are different ways to do that, and systems are different. And of course, you deal with if you see how we have I mean, the reasoning of our Korea decision, it is different than the reasoning of our UK decision, because systems are different, and the different pieces of a system in terms of oversight, in terms of redress, in terms of structure of the system are different. But the outcome has, of course, to be the same, and the outcome is fixed, if you want, by our mandate, which is the Schrems II judgment. Let's not forget that the court has been much clearer in Schrems II than in Schrems I. In Schrems I, the court told us, look, Commission, you got it wrong, because you adopted an adequacy decision at the time, the safe harbor, without assessing governance access. You stopped at commercial privacy, meaning the way companies handle data and protect data. You didn't cover the scenario in which public authorities may seek access to data. Indeed, we didn't know we had to do this, and Schrems I was, of course, I'm simplifying, but the court told us also the standard is essential equivalence. In the Schrems II decision, the court told us, yes, you carried out that analysis, but we don't think that is a valid analysis because you didn't check that, or you didn't fulfill those requirements. And we have, thinking about the redress part of the judgment, but also about the other part on necessity and proportionality, we have now a quite detailed mandate. So that's what we need to fulfill. It is there. It is good because it's public, it's known to us, it's known to our American partners. And I can tell you the discussions that we have here now are very rich. We are really exploring solutions and ways to fulfill those requirements. Whether we are going to agree or not, that's too early to say. But clearly, for us, if we cannot meet those requirements and they cannot credibly explain and in a convincing way defend our decision as meeting those requirements, we of course won't have a deal. But we are not yet there, and I hope we will succeed. Part of the discussion of the public discussion is whether this requires legislation, whether this can be done through executive action. In a certain sense, this is putting the horses before the cart. For us, what is essential is that, as again, we meet those requirements of proportionality, on necessity, on redress, and which vehicle and legal vehicle, whether you can do this through legislation, whether you can do this through executive action, whether you need a mix of legislation and legislative action, is in a certain sense, I'm not saying it's not important, but it is secondary. What we need, once again, is a number of safeguards, a number of individual rights that are enforceable, that can be where individuals can invoke certain safeguards that are, of course, binding on the intelligence community, and a independent redress mechanism where individuals can invoke those binding safeguards. That's what we need. It's, yes, easier to say and to summarize than doing, but that's what we need. On the question in the on the chat, well, codes of conduct and certification are, we believe, important, very important transfer mechanisms. Let's also not think that it's a way to circumvent the Schrems II requirements. Codes of conduct and certification are so-called appropriate safeguard mechanisms. They are subject to the same requirements than SCCs and the BCRs, which are what the court said on SCCs in the Schrems II judgment. But we believe indeed that they are very important tools. We are not alone in doing that. This is work that requires cooperation between the EDPB and the Commission. The EDPB has issued guidance on codes of conduct and certification within the EU. They said at that point that they will issue at a later stage guidance on code of conduct and certification for international transfer. They are working on this right now This will happen, I'm saying, in the really shortly, and this will be made public for consultation. So certainly we encourage you to provide your feedback. But there are also slightly different mechanisms. Certification, I don't need to say what certification is. Codes of conduct is a mechanism that requires, first of all, certain sector of the industry to identify their needs and their specific needs or feature and their best, in a certain sense, their best practices. And we certainly encourage companies, meaning certain sectors, certain industries, to come to us if they have identified for transfers what would be what they would believe would be worth, in a certain sense, endorsing or certifying to a code of conduct. We would be very interested to do that. We would, of course, help support that work, including the work that needs to be done again with the DPB. But this is not something we can really take the initiative of. It needs really, it's a bottom-up type of process. Yes, maybe let me mention the last point in reaction to what has been said about the OECD. Again, the OECD is a process we support very much, to the extent it then leads to a credible outcome. But let's really, in a certain sense, it would be wrong to expect that the OECD will provide the solution here. The OECD, this is not about creating any binding arrangement. This is not about creating new standards. This is about identifying common safeguards, which is, of course, very useful to do. It's also a very important signal that like-minded countries send to other systems around the world. We do it like this, and we believe that this indeed draws a line between what democracy and rule and system governed by rule of law are compared to others. But we are here at the beginning of a process. I would already be very happy if we can agree at the OECD on a number of common and quite high level, but given the nature of the exercise, safeguards against around redress, proportionality, necessity, oversight, that of course also can inform other conversation, can inform the work of regulators, but that will never replace the type of binding and detailed arrangement we need if we want to replace the privacy shield.
Thank you, Bruno, for that reaction. I would have liked us all, I think, to have another round of responses, but I think one clear lesson from all this is that 1 hour is never enough for these discussions. There was also a question, another question in the chat. Thanks, Peter, for quickly addressing that. I'm afraid we have to close this year in the interest of time. I would like to thank all of our speakers for this conversation. As ITI, we will continue to be very engaged in this. It's a top priority for the tech community. And hopefully in the coming months will bring us closer to a solution. Hopefully these conversations will help us get closer to a solution. So thanks again to all. Thanks to our audience for joining us in this hot July afternoon, at least here in Italy, where I am now. And we'll keep you posted. We'll speak to you soon on this. Thanks a lot. Have a good afternoon or day.
And congratulations to Italy also.
Thank you.
That's more important than any issue, any conversation on that approach.
But Italy lost to Djokovic, so there we are. That's my country. Serbia wins in tennis.
Okay, the word is fair, Bojana. You see, even the word of sports is fair. So you see.